Is it possible that South Carolina loses every game they play on the road this year? Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I am your host, Chris Marler. It is good to talk to each and every one of you. I appreciate you guys joining us along for the ride. We got a good one today, and we're going to be talking about the South Carolina schedule. But first and foremost, thank you for everyone that makes South Carolina and Locked On Gamecocks your first listen. Shout out to our everydayers. You guys are tremendous, and we appreciate you. We are free and available. Remember, wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. The summer is coming to an end, but you've got college football coming up. We're less than about 3 weeks away from week 0. There's a lot of stuff to be betting on, a lot of stuff in South Carolina to be betting on. Very excited about all of it. But make sure you are joining along with the fun over there at FanDuel. They have something for everyone every single day, especially in the summer. So make sure you take advantage of that. They have a boost or a bonus every single day. So there's something for everyone all day, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's jump into the show. We're going to talk about the South Carolina schedule on today's episode and discuss, a couple of things I think that we aren't talking enough about. There's one thing that I keep saying with the schedule. The schedule is a schedule. I don't think South Carolina fans are super concerned with the idea that the schedule is going to be difficult. Now, it's going to be difficult. It's difficult every year. And I've got some numbers to talk about that, and we'll break some of that down as well. But when I say the schedule is the schedule, what I mainly mean is this is nothing new to South Carolina and playing a difficult schedule. Right now on ESPN FPI, you have the 17th hardest schedule in the country. But I don't think that's as bad as some people might think. And I'll explain why here shortly. So 17th in FPI, those numbers are always a little bit skewed. I apologize for all this corgi hair that I have on the hat here today. Apparently even Pepper wants me to get a new hat. So we'll do that shortly. But getting into the schedule, like I said, ESPN FPI brought this out the other day, and it's South Carolina having the 17th hardest schedule in the country. That sounds difficult, right? But here's the thing. That's like the 11th hardest in the SEC, according to FPI. You play 7 teams, and this is all on ESPN. Play 7 teams that are ranked in the preseason top 25. All 7 of those teams are ranked in the top 16. And that's ESPN FPI. You also play 7 teams that are currently ranked in the ESPN. I'm sorry, the coaches preseason top 25 from the coaches poll. All 7 of those teams are in the top 20. You got 3 that are in the top 10. So it is a difficult schedule, right? You got Ole Miss, you got Bama, you got Mizzou. Those are all teams that are ranked in the top 10. You got, you dodge Georgia, you dodge Tennessee, but you still have a lot of tough teams on there. I want to take away from the ESPN FPI thing, though, for a second and talk about a different metric that Phil Steele has used. Because Phil Steele, let's face it, FPI is not the most accurate way to look at college football. And I love that we get to talk about it because it's something to talk about, right? But I always go back to this one specific example of why you cannot trust ESPN FPI. I'll give you 1.5. How about that? A couple of years ago, when they came out with their top 25, they had Mississippi State as a top 10 team in preseason 2021. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. To this day, it just makes no sense to me. But when you talk about the reason I distrust them the most, right? In the 2019 season, Alabama and LSU played on a field to determine who was the best team. It was in Tuscaloosa. Alabama was ranked 2nd. LSU was ranked 3rd, according to ESPN FPI. Alabama lost that game, and LSU was obviously the better team because they won that game and then also won 15 total that year and won a national championship. They were ranked behind Alabama for 2 weeks after beating them, according to ESPN FPI. So I say take it with a grain of salt, the smallest grain you can. I want to talk about Phil Steele and his magazine because it's, as he will tell you, and I bring it up a lot, the most accurate preseason magazine in the country, right? Does a tremendous job. Love Phil Steele. But when he was breaking down his toughest schedules, these are some of the numbers that he has with South Carolina. Now, in terms of in opponents' winning percentage from a year ago, right? And how it translates into this year's hardest ranked schedules in the country. South Carolina is ranked 25th. Now, what does that mean? That means they have the 25th hardest schedule in terms of what their opponents for this season's winning, win percentage was a year ago. So their 2023 opponents, they were a total of 89 and 64, which is a win percentage of 582. Like I said, 25th in the country. Last year. Now he ranks their schedule, like their actual schedule difficulty, and it's different than the opponent win percentage. That's just obviously like who you're facing and what they did a year ago. But the strength of schedule he has for them this year is ranked 32nd, 10th hardest in the SEC. And here's what I keep going back to, guys. The schedule is the schedule. The schedule is going to be hard. But we're not going to have a woe is me attitude about that this year. I don't think Carolina fans have that at all in general, but you're not going to have it this year, especially because even if it's 17th in the FPI, it's the 10th hardest in the SEC. Even if it's 32nd in the country for Phil Steele, it's the 11th hardest in the SEC. You're in near the bottom half, or you are in the bottom half of strength of schedule and schedule difficulty per those metrics. Sure, it's still tough. I mean, it's crazy to think that you're like the 10th or 11th hardest schedule in the country and you might be 17th and 32nd overall. Or I'm sorry, 10th or 11th hardest in the SEC and then, 17th or 32nd overall in the country. That's how strong the conference is. But we know that every year. So I look at that and what it leads me to on this episode today. We're going to rank the toughest opponents for South Carolina going into the 2024 season, 1 through 12. We'll get right into it, and we'll go with the hardest ones first and get into it. And I think that the hardest one, I think, is a surprise, and it's also not a surprise. Before we get into that, I want to go over a few things of just South Carolina in general. South Carolina's home record over the last 3 seasons under Shane Beamer, 15-6. They've gone 5-2 at home every single year. Love that. On the road, you're 5-12 in the last 3 years. 5-12. You went 0-5 last year in games away from home. You've lost 6 straight. The 0-5 you had a year ago, you lost us by 14 points per game. So in my rankings, I have some of the road games skewed to be a little more difficult than I think the home games are, obviously. And that's for a number of reasons. It's also for the fact that I've been beating the drum on this for a while. That trio of games you have at home between Mizzou, LSU, and Ole Miss, you're going to beat one of those teams. Mark my words, South Carolina will beat one of those teams. And I told you about those teams' records away from home. You could add another one in there, Texas A&M. Now, I'm fully aware of what South Carolina's recent history and record is against Mizzou, and especially against Texas A&M, because Texas A&M has owned South Carolina in that stupid-ass trophy game that they forced onto us when they came into the conference. One of the dumbest trophies. I mean, listen, the Big Ten has some really stupid trophies. I'm not sure if teams and fans in the Big Ten realize that Paul Bunyan is not a real person, so it seems a bit odd to have not 1 but 2 trophies themed after him. But I'm fully aware of what the history and the recent history is of South Carolina and versus Texas A&M, and also South Carolina versus Mizzou. But I'm telling you right now, those 3 teams I mentioned, Ole Miss, LSU, and Mizzou, you're going to beat one of them. You add A&M in there, I think you might beat 2. But even those 4, you are getting a win somewhere in there in those 4 games. And when you look at it that way, then getting to a bowl game is much more manageable, right? I keep going over this. Like, there's not a game on the schedule for anybody outside of this city and outside of this fan base. It's like, they could jump up and get somebody there. That's a toss-up. No, it's not. No one is saying that. And it's so stupid. It is so ridiculous and short-sighted of what is most likely going to happen and what happens every year in college football, especially in this conference and especially with this team. So we will get into the rankings 1 through 12, the toughest schemes that are on South Carolina's schedule. Before we do, I want to remind you guys about our good friends over here at FanDuel. Now, listen, summer's winding down. Obviously, playoffs are over. We got Little League Baseball. I don't know if you can bet on that. And if you are, let's talk about it. That's probably not a good thing. But with the playoffs winding down and we're still a couple weeks away from the start of college football season. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But with our good friends at FanDuel, there is something for everyone each and every single day. Make sure you head on over there, start an account today, get going on some very fun times. And listen, there's a boost or a bonus literally every single day, guys. Like I mentioned in the intro, this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. So that's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about the rankings of this year's toughest schedule or toughest opponents on South Carolina's schedule. All right, guys, welcome back in. Listen, before we get into the schedule here, one last thing I wanted to mention is something that I cannot bring up. So maybe we aren't going to mention it. Who knows? All right, whatever. Let's just get right into it. Okay, so going over the schedule and ranking the toughest opponents 1 through 12, let's start with the hardest one. And listen, I bring this up because, like I said, I think my numbers might be a little bit skewed for road games versus home games. We talked a lot about the Ole Miss game. We've talked a lot about Clemson and Kentucky even on the road early. Those are all tough games. The team that I have with the hardest team on this schedule this year is Alabama because it's on the road. Obviously, it's Alabama. They've got some holes, and there's an ability to go get them. If you're South Carolina, you can remember probably the biggest win in the last, one of the biggest wins in the last decade and a half, obviously, is that Steven Garcia all-time moment game. Love talking to Steven about this. We'll probably have him on the podcast as soon as we get a little bit closer to the season or in the season. We'll definitely have him on the podcast that week. I love Steven to death. But that game, obviously, huge, really put South Carolina on the map and propelled them into what was going to happen for the next 3 years after that season in 2010. But that game on the road against Bama, you're going to face a offense with Kalen DeBoer that's probably going to put up around 40 points a game, and they are going to be very, very good. And they are still that talent. The talent on that roster is still one of the best in the country. You're going into Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's a place that they have played very, very well at. Obviously, you lost to Texas a year ago, but outside of that, guys, I mean, you're talking about beating Bama at home. It happened in 2019 against one of probably the greatest team of all time, 2019 LSU. You're talking about 2015 Ole Miss. That's a game where Bama had 5 turnovers, 3 of them inside their own 25-yard line. Not a lot of teams go into Bryant-Denny Stadium, especially the last decade, and come out with a win. Off the top of my head, I believe it is just 3. 2015 Ole Miss, 2019 LSU, and 2023 Texas. So that's going to be a very difficult game, and it's on the road. Now, I think if I'm looking at the schedule, out of all the ones that I think you have, that South Carolina has the least chance to win, that one's the hardest one for me. That's the hardest one for me to wrap my head around, thinking how do you go ahead and beat them? And it's also partially because the way you're going to have to beat Bama, we don't have to get too deep into this, the X's and O's of it. You're going to need a powerful run game. You're going to need Lenore Sellers and company to keep that defense on the field and that offense off of it. I think that's their best chance of winning. The second hardest game on the schedule, in my opinion, at Clemson. Listen, I've rewatched that South Carolina Clemson game from a couple of years ago multiple times, even this offseason, and just awesome. Even today, 2 years later, or a year and a half later, so damn good. Now, let's call it what it is, though. It is still very difficult to go into Death Valley, well, fake Death Valley, because the real one's in Baton Rouge, but go into fake Death Valley and come out with a win. I mean, that win snapped a 40-game winning streak they had at home. Now, granted, most of those are against teams that are like Georgia Tech and Boston College and crap like that. But nonetheless, it is a very tough game to play in Clemson. I think that you have a good chance of winning it. The only reason I put it up higher than Ole Miss and OU, I mean, you could really move it. And the more I talk about it, I feel like I'm almost convincing myself that you should, because I don't think Clemson's going to be that good this year, guys. I really don't. But the history there, what you've done recently in that game, and then the other part of it, man, is I couldn't get past the 0-5 on the road a year ago. You got to snap that this year. Have to snap that. I think that's the second hardest game on the schedule. It's also a rivalry game. Now, it's a rivalry game where in the history of this rivalry, you only have 20% of the games that have been decided by one score or less. But it's still a very tough game, obviously. And the more I look at it, though, I really want to switch it to 4 behind the team that's there. 3, I've got Ole Miss at home. Now, I am a big proponent. This game is going to be so damn fun. It's going to be so much fun. Juice Wells coming back. Just the crap trash talk that him and Lane Kiffin had on Twitter and the little troll and all that kind of crap. So stupid. There's going to be a lot of eyes on that game, I think, when they come here. And I think that you do have a chance to get them. Now, let's also call it what it is, though. You've got a ton of talent on that Ole Miss team, and it's going to be a very good offense. But like I've told you before, not only is that program 11-8 in road games over the last 3 years, those 8 losses are by an average of over 20 points per game. Also, they have not beaten a team on the road in a true road game that's finished with a winning record in the last 2 years besides Tulane. So you have a chance to go get them. Can you do it? I think it's a possibility, but I still think it's the 3rd hardest game on the schedule, strictly because of the talent that Ole Miss will bring into there. 4, I've got at OU. Now, there's a 3-game schedule there. You have Bama, Ole Miss, and OU, not in that order, back to back to back, and it's one of the hardest 3-game runs and stretches in the entire country at any point during the season. Like I said, that OU, you could easily switch it out to Clemson, and I think it'll be as difficult. Oklahoma's going to have a very good football team this year. They're going to have a very good football team. They might not be a team when you look at the end of the year that is 10-2 or 11-1 or anything like that. They might not be in the playoff. They're going to have a very good team. They're going to have a very good team, and going on the road to Norman, especially in a situation where, man, OU fans are very excited about being in the SEC and welcoming teams to that environment. I think it's going to be tough. I also think the way they're going to play their style and brand of football, with the way that they're going to have Jackson Arnold on offense, the weapons he has at receiver, and then also with Brent Venables, coming into year 3 with installing his type of defense. I think that's going to be a very, very difficult game. So I've got, again, the 4 hardest games I got so far: Bama at 1, at Clemson at 2, Ole Miss at 3, OU at 4. There's probably still time for this to change. At 5 and 6, so it's 2 games I keep talking about. I got LSU at 5, and I got Mizzou at 6. Now, hear me out on this. LSU is not going to be as good of a football team necessarily as Mizzou. Maybe like they're not ranked ahead of them right now. They're right outside the top 10. Mizzou, depending on where you look, is projected inside the top 10 or right around, like 11 or 12. I have LSU as a harder game. You get them both at home, but I have LSU as a harder game, not because of what they could do on offense. Mizzou should be better on offense. Mizzou's defense, even though LSU got their D coordinator from a year ago, it was light years ahead of what LSU's defense was last year. I mean, LSU's defense was, guys, there's just no reason to have a Heisman winning quarterback and 2 first-round draft picks at receiver and still finish 9-3 in the regular season. That's unbelievable. Pepper's coming over here to say hello, just so you guys know. She's also fired up about the schedule. But going back to this, I keep looking at this. Okay, there she is. I keep looking at this, and I'm thinking LSU early in the season, right? LSU's early in the season. I think that's more difficult strictly because of this. LSU's going to be coming off of, I don't know who, I don't have it in front of me of who they have before South Carolina, but I know that it's going to be easier than what Mizzou has. Mizzou is going to be coming off a game against Oklahoma at home, and then you get South Carolina a week after this. I did a whole show on this. I urge you guys to watch it. I thought it was one of the best shows we did. It was just on a Friday, so we didn't get as much traction on it. But I think that South Carolina can beat Mizzou this year, because if there was ever the definition of a trap game, it's that one. The week after they play their former Big 12 foe at home, and in their minds, too, you got to think about this. That game's been circled for months, right? Getting Oklahoma at home. The other part of it is you get them at home, and then you kind of have in there, I think in a lot of like Mizzou fans and people around the program, in their minds, you kind of have the hay in the barn if you're trying to get to a postseason berth, especially in the playoff, because your last 3 games are like Arkansas, it's somebody like Mississippi State, and South Carolina. So in their eyes, it's like, oh, we're going to win all those. You've beaten, South Carolina 5 years in a row. So I understand the history of this one, and having Mizzou beaten you 5 years straight, you've lost 5 in a row by 13 points on average. But I still have that one behind the LSU game, strictly because LSU early in the season, you still might have both teams trying to find themselves a little bit. And I don't think you're going to be in a situation where Mizzou can look ahead. And that is the definition of a trap game, especially in November. You're talking about game 10 on the schedule versus game 4. Love that. Love that. So I have LSU at 5, and then I have Mizzou at 6. And then I want to say this. The rest of the schedule, so the top half of the schedule I have ranked: Bama at 1, Clemson 2, Ole Miss 3, Oklahoma 4, LSU 5, Mizzou at 6. The next 6 that I'm telling you, this is where you got to at least have your wins. You got to get 5 wins out of these next 6. You have to. You just have to. There's just no other way about it. We'll get into those 5 here in a second. Before we do, I want to remind you about our good friends at Game Time app. I told you guys about this for a long time. I love the Game Time app. I use them, talked about using them for when I went to go see Creed. They're just a fantastic company in general, and do a great job at all your ticketing needs, but especially when you're getting closer and closer to the actual events. It's the only one that I know of that gets the prices go down as you get closer. Another awesome thing about the Game Time app and them in general, they show your all-in pricing up front before you make your purchase. You can buy your tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. You can also see the view from your seats on your phone before you buy. If you're in Williams-Brice, maybe you're looking for something, if there's any shade, maybe you make sure you find some seats with a little bit of shade, especially in those early season September games. But with a Game Time guarantee, you will always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You get money back on that. You have job loss insurance. If you lose your job and need a refund, Game Time has you covered. Event cancellation protection, automatic full funds for events that are canceled and not rescheduled, 24-hour returns guarantee. If you return your tickets within 24 hours from the time of purchase, you get a full credit to your Game Time account. No questions asked. Guys, they just go above and beyond. Listen, what I just read was like 2 bullet points on everything they had. I could spend a very long time bragging on how great of a job the Game Time group and Game Time app does. They do a phenomenal job. And again, just it's very, very simple. And if you are signing up today, make sure you do, because they are giving away as the events get closer, the tickets get cheaper over and over and over again. So make sure you are using the Game Time app for all of your Gamecock ticket needs, as well as other ticket needs as well. All right, when we get back, last thing about Game Time. I don't know how I keep forgetting this. Make sure you go to the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, right? LOCKEDONCollege. You get $20 off your first purchase. $20 off. So go to the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase today. Make sure you head over to the Game Time app right now, or after the show as well. All right, when we get into the next and final segment, we're going to be ranking the lower and bottom half of the schedule and the toughest opponents for the Gamecocks in 2024. That is up next on Locked On Gamecocks. Make sure you stick around. All right, welcome back in, guys. Listen, we're going to finish out today's show. Again, we are ranking the most difficult teams on the 2024 schedule for the Gamecocks. All right, in my bottom 6 teams, and this is why I said you got to get 5 wins here. You got to get 5 wins here. Let's get these out of the way first, because I don't want to get into these. I'll rank these from the bottom. At 12, so the easiest one on the schedule, I got Wofford. 11, Akron. Guys, I don't know if you're familiar with Akron, but don't be. Very bad. It's just so bad. I legitimately almost put them below Wofford, but they're the Terriers. They recruited me to play baseball, and it was very nice, but I just couldn't wrap my head around the Terriers. That's a tough one. Listen, I know I own a Corgi, but the Terrier is an inferior and very, very non-menacing mascot. I'll say that. But I have Wofford and then Akron, and then I have ODU at 10. I almost put them ahead of Vandy because of, it's a team that made a bowl game a year ago. But again, you get ODU at home, first game of the year. I'm super pumped for that. Like I said, we're about 22 days away from that. And you also have Vandy up next. It's on the road. You should have no trouble with Vandy at all. You should have no trouble with Vandy. But it's on the road. Haven't been great on the road over the past couple of years. Like I said, you're 5-12 in the last 3 years combined. 0-5 last year. You've lost 6 straight. You should beat Vandy. I'm not worried about losing any of those 4 games. But that's why I have them from ranked 9 through 12. All right, let's get to 8 and 7. 8, right? I have Kentucky. I have Kentucky ranked behind A&M, even though it's a road game. And here's the reason why. It's early enough in the season where I think you could jump up and get Kentucky, and I don't think you should be surprised if that happens. Like the national media thinking this is I don't know. Like, this is not 2018 Kentucky. This is not 2021 Kentucky. I don't think it's going to be as big of an uphill battle as it's being portrayed to be. Keep in mind, Mark Stoops is like 2-30 in his career against teams in the regular season. I think it's SEC teams that have finished with a winning record. Like 2-30. That is unbelievably bad. Unbelievably bad. I mean, that's right around 3%. Like, that is, I mean, that's really bad. So I have Kentucky there. Listen, now I'm not saying that you shouldn't be concerned with Kentucky. You won the last two, but let's keep in mind you also lost 7 of 8 before that, from 2014 to 2021. Now, Beamer has done a better job against Stoops, but again, it's on the road. You definitely need to have a performance like you had 2 years ago on the road with Spencer Rattler, going up there and beating a ranked Kentucky team by double digits. I'm not saying you need to win by double digits, but you need to win this game, because if you don't, you're going to start hearing some people chirping early about Beamer and his job security and all that good stuff, or bad stuff, I guess. I still have that behind Texas A&M, because you get Texas A&M at home. You could win both these games. You can win both these games. Like, the more I look at this record, I'm still kind of stuck on 6-6, but there's a path to 7-5. There's a path to 8-4, especially if you get things rolling. But I think that like I said, you have to win 5 of those 6. You just have to. You have to. I have Texas A&M as the 7th hardest ranked team on this schedule. They have owned South Carolina. They have just flat out owned South Carolina. There's just no other way to put it. You've lost 9 of 10. Man, you lost 9 of 10. The last 8 losses, you've only scored 20 points or more one time. But here's the thing. A&M is also 2-9 on the road in their last 2 years. So at some point, I'll just add them all up, because I probably should have already done that. But I've told you about the record for Ole Miss is only 11-8 on the road. LSU is only 8-10 on the road. Mizzou is 5 and hold on, we can just look it up real quick. Mizzou in their last couple of years is only like they're not good. I want to say they're only 3 and they went 5-1 on the road last year. But before that, I believe it was around like 3-12 or something like that. It was very, very below average. So you can absolutely beat these teams at home. You like all the teams that struggle the most on the road and on your schedule outside of like Vandy. Well, actually, you get them, no, that's a road game. But like A&M, 2-9 the last 2 years. Mizzou, the first 3 years on Drinkwitz, they were abysmal on the road. And now you say you have them, LSU and Ole Miss. Like, I mean, like, all those teams underperform when they're on the road, including Texas A&M. And they have a first-year head coach, and they got a quarterback coming off of injury. And let's be honest, like, they lost a ton of people to the portal, like 30 people. The strength they have is going to be on defense. Offensively, they returned 2 or 3 starters at receiver, but like that's a very good matchup for South Carolina this year. This should not look like it has in the past at all. It should look closer to what we saw last year. But that is a team that has owned you and has won 9 of 10 that came into the league. So it's an uphill battle, I think, just from a mental standpoint. You have to get over that, right? You got to get over that hump. But if you do match up very well with Texas A&M. So I think that I have them ranked 7th. I do think they're a lot more talented, not a lot more, but they are more talented from a roster standpoint, especially the skill positions than Kentucky is. Connor Wegman is a good quarterback, but again, coming off an injury, right? He's I think only played 9 games in 2 years because of injuries. You have a first-year head coach in Mike Elko. Like, who knows that team looks like? Because if there's any team that has very obviously seemed to quit on their coach, I know that he's gone now, but the team that's done that over the past couple of years, it's A&M. So that'll be an interesting game as well. But like I said, I have it as the 7th hardest game on the schedule. So just quick recap on this. From toughest to easiest, from number 1, you have at Bama, 2 at Clemson, 3 Ole Miss at home, 4 at Oklahoma, 5 LSU at home, 6 Missouri at home, 7 is Texas A&M, 8 is at Kentucky, 9 at Vandy, 10 ODU, 11 Akron, and 12 the mighty Wofford Terriers. That is what I believe should be the ranking of 2024 opponents for South Carolina. Tell me in the comments if I'm right, wrong, somewhere in between, or how much you hate my hat, whatever. I appreciate you guys joining us. Listen, we will be back again tomorrow. We got more stuff for fall camp. I just want to mix in something a little bit different from the monotony of what's going on with fall camp and the limited reports that are coming out anyway, especially before you have your first scrimmage. So before we go, I want to remind you real quick that I appreciate you guys making Locked On your first listen. Shout out to our everydayers, but make sure your second listen is is still in our family and listening to Locked On College Football, the Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link in the Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't even need to search. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Appreciate you guys. Hope you have a fantastic week so far. Hope you have a fantastic start to your weekend tomorrow. Let's be safe. Let's be smart. Let's have some fun. 22 days until kickoff. Love y'all. Talk to you tomorrow.